My name is George Miller. I'm 75 years old, and last fall my own children left me curled up at a gas station bench at 3 o'clock in the morning. They drove away like I was nothing but baggage. I called them hundreds of times, begging for someone to come back. They blocked my number. The next day I sold their house without warning. That's the headline, isn't it? The kind of thing you'd skim over in a newspaper and shake your head at. But when it's your own life, when it's your bones stiff on a cold metal bench and your hands shaking against a styrofoam cup of burnt coffee, it feels different. It feels like betrayal in its purest form. Breath. It happened on a Tuesday night in Macon, Georgia, just off I-75. The gas station was one of those 24-hour Speedy Mart's fluorescent lights, buzzing moths batting against the glass. The air smelled like gasoline and fried chicken grease that never quite leaves the tiles. I'd been riding in the back seat of my son Daniel's SUV. His wife Karen sat up front tapping at her phone. My daughter Marcy was following in her minivan with the grandkids asleep in the back. Daniel had told me earlier that week, "Dad will take you out for a late drive, clear your head." I didn't argue. At 75, I've learned when to keep my mouth shut. But when we pulled into that gas station and he told me, "Why don't you stretch your legs a bit, Dad?" I had a feeling something wasn't right. I stepped out, slow my knees, stiff from arthritis. The bench out front was cold metal biting through my thin slacks. Daniel popped the trunk, said something to Karen, and then without looking me in the eye, he slammed it shut. The SUV pulled away. Marcy's van followed. At first, I told myself they were circling back, maybe grabbing snacks for the kids. I checked my watch. 3:05 a.m. The clock on the wall inside the mart ticked loud. The clerk barely looked at me. Minutes stretched long like someone pulling taffy. I pulled out my flip phone, the one I still use because I never cared for those smart gadgets. I dialed Daniel. Straight to voicemail. I tried Marcy. Same. I tried again. 10 calls, 20. By the 50th, my hands were shaking so bad the screen blurred. By the 100th, I knew. When I hit call one more time and the voice said, "This number has been blocked," my stomach dropped like I was falling down a well. Huh? I sat there until the clerk finally brought me a cup of coffee out of pity. "Sir, you okay?" he asked. He couldn't have been more than 22. His name tag said, Darnell. "My kids," I muttered. "They left me." He shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe they'll come back." "No," I said, more certain than I'd ever been of anything. "They won't." He didn't know what to say. He patted my shoulder and went back inside. The coffee was bitter, but I held onto it like it might anchor me to something. I thought about my late wife, Mary. She'd passed 12 years earlier from lung cancer. Back then, the kids swore up and down they'd take care of me when I got old. Daniel even said, "Dad, you'll never be alone." Funny how promises rot faster than wood. Do. Around dawn, Darnell let me use the landline inside. I called an old friend, Bill Jenkins, who I used to work with down at the tire plant. He picked up on the second ring. "George, it's 4:30 in the morning. You all right?" "No," I said plainly. "My kids left me at a gas station. Can you come get me?" Silence, then a low curse. "Where are you?" Half an hour later, his old Ford pickup rumbled into the lot. When he saw me sitting there with my bag at my feet, he shook his head. "Lord George, I knew your Daniel was hard, but this..." I climbed into his truck. The vinyl seat cracked, the smell of motor oil filling my nose. "I don't want pity, Bill. I just want a roof for the night." "You got more than that," he said, his voice tight. "You got me." Bill dropped me at his place on Elm Street, a small house with siding peeling at the corners. His wife, Jean, made me eggs and toast. I sat at their kitchen table, the linoleum curling at the edges, and felt more welcome there than I had in my own children's homes in years. That morning, with the sun just starting to creep through the blinds, I made myself a promise. If my children thought they could discard me like yesterday's trash, they were about to learn something new about me. I might be 75, but I wasn't powerless. Not yet. And the house they thought they'd inherit one day, by the time I was finished, it wouldn't be theirs anymore. Because sometimes revenge isn't fists or shouting. Sometimes it's a pen, a signature, a decision made quietly without warning. Bill let me sleep in his spare room that first night, the one with the mismatched quilt Jean's sister made the ceiling fan that ticked when it hit the slow setting. I woke to the smell of bacon and black coffee, and for a second, I forgot where I was. Then the memory hit the bench, the buzzing lights, the way Daniel wouldn't meet my eye. I sat on the edge of the bed and studied my hands, the nicks along the knuckles from a lifetime of turning wrenches, the crescent scar from a slipped box cutter in '87, the swollen joints that sing when it rains, hands that raised a family, hands my kids have learned not to see. Over breakfast, Bill tried to make me eat. "You always liked your bacon crisp," he said, sliding the plate closer. "I liked it how Mary made it," I said, and we both let the name sit there a moment. My wife's been gone 12 years, but grief tends to show up uninvited when you're tired. Jean poured coffee. "You'll stay as long as you need," she said. "No fuss." "Thank you," I said, "but I won't be under anyone's feet long." I meant it, and to explain why I've got to tell you about the years that got me here. I hired on at the tire plant off Emory Highway in the summer of 1970, fresh out of Central High with a toolbox I'd bought from a pawn shop on Pio Nono Avenue. Back then it was good, honest work. If you showed up early and kept your head down, you could buy a little brick ranch grill on Saturdays and take your kids to Lake Tobsofsky on Sundays. I met Mary at a church potluck in the fellowship hall of Vineville Baptist. She brought a banana pudding that could make a grown man forget his manners. We married in '73, scrimped and saved, and in '76 we closed on a 2-bedroom on Brookdale Avenue, $29,900, and a mortgage that felt like a mountain. I painted the trim myself, Mary planted azaleas, and when Daniel was born the next spring, I stood in the hallway at Navicent Health holding that pink wailing bundle and promised him the moon. Promises you make to your kids don't sound like poetry. They sound like, "I'll take the second shift and I'll fix that leak this weekend, and we can make do until Friday." They sound like a man tightening his belt so his daughter can have clarinet lessons. When Marcy came along in '79 and Tyler in '84, we squeezed a crib into the second bedroom, and I framed out a third, with weekend lumber from Lowe's on Eisenhower. I taught Daniel to throw a 2-seamer in the side yard with a bucket of scuffed balls. I stood up in the bleachers at Ed DeFore Sports Complex and clapped till my palms stung when Marcy hit her first note without squawking. When Tyler needed braces and the insurance balked, I sold my bass boat and told him straight teeth first, fish later. Shh. People like to say the '80s were easy. Maybe they were for some. We had layoffs at the plant in '82. I picked up evenings changing oil at Turner's Garage on Gray Highway and delivered Macon Telegraph on Sundays for a spell. Mary sewed patches for Little League uniforms at the kitchen table and made casseroles from whatever was in the pantry. We kept the lights on. We kept going. In '98, the mortgage slipped 2 months behind when Mary had that hysterectomy. I remember the way the past due notice looked under the refrigerator magnet red letters like a shout. I took a night shift loading truck, slept 4 hours a day, and paid the arrears with a cashier's check I'd folded into my wallet like a secret. I never told the kids. Some Waits parents carry alone. The years blur, after that the way good years do. There's cookouts and school plays and Christmas morning when the boys wanted a PlayStation and Mary and I could only swing used bikes. We found a way to make those bikes look new with elbow grease and paint. Daniel got a job selling HVAC units. Marcy studied to be a dental assistant. Tyler tried community college, then drifting gigs, music, landscaping a spell at Waffle House on Riverside. Nothing stuck. When Mary got sick in 2011, lung spots, no one could talk around my world, shrank to hospital rooms and pharmacy counters. The kids came around then, less than not enough. That's not me indicting them. It's me telling the truth. People visit when they can stand to. I learned to sleep in plastic chairs and make peace with vending machine dinners. I learned to smile at nurses and hold Mary's hand when her breath turned shallow, count each rise like the tide until it didn't rise anymore. After the funeral, I tried to hold the family together with Sunday pot roasts and the threat of card games. Some nights went fine. Some nights ended with Daniel talking over everyone, correcting the way I sliced meat, telling me I needed to let him handle things. He's the oldest. Control looks like love to him. Marcy brought the grandkids and tried to keep peace by apologizing for things that weren't hers. Tyler came late and left early, promising to call. Then the recession hit Daniel's sales hard in 2009 and rolled into his second act like thunder that won't quit. By 2014, he and Karen were drowning credit cards, missed payments, a minivan note 2 months behind. Their house over on Autumn Creek Lane was weeks from foreclosure. He came to me at the kitchen table with numbers on a legal pad. Dad, if you could just co-sign the refinance? Son, with my pension and Social Security, they won't approve that. But I can do one thing. I emptied 50 years of saving everything extra left after Mary's medical debts, and I bought the place outright in a last-minute short sale deed in my name. You and Karen pay the taxes and insurance. When you're steady, we'll talk about transferring. He hugged me hard. You saved us, he said, voice thick. I should have put that promise in writing. I didn't. I believed my own son's word. Marcy had her turn too. When her first marriage cracked, I moved her and the kids into the old Brookdale house and paid the light bill through Georgia Power so it didn't blink out when the heat index climbed. Tyler bounced from couch to couch until my doctor looked at me over his glasses and said, George, you're 70. You can't keep bailing everybody forever. Maybe I couldn't. I did anyway. What no one tells you about sacrifice is how quiet it is. It's not a parade. It's 100 small choices you make with no witness. You give because that's what fathers do. You give because you remember the electric hot plate on your own mama's table and the way your daddy's hands looked when rent was due. You give until your kids think the well has no bottom. Then one day they tell you you're a burden. They tell you they need space. They tell you to rest and trust them with the paperwork. Power of attorney will just make bills easier, Dad. Daniel said it like a kindness at my kitchen table 2 summers ago. He slid forms across the wood, his pen already uncapped. It's just so I can pay things when you forget. I haven't forgotten yet, I said. Yeah, he said, smile too tight, but you will. I didn't sign. Something in me, maybe Mary's voice, said not to. He didn't push that day. He started small instead. He moved my mail to his address to streamline. He put my doctor on speaker and answered questions I should have answered myself. He told Marcy and Tyler I was slipping even when I wasn't, and when I pushed back, he accused me of being ungrateful for everything he manages. Meanwhile, year after year, I paid the Autumn Creek property taxes because they forgot, and the county sends those yellow notices on stiff paper that feel like shame when you touch them. I paid the homeowner's insurance after the storm tore off a corner of the roof, and Daniel said the deductible was too high. I told myself family was messy and love is patient, and all the other church words you use when your heart is breaking slow. Which is how you end up with a man my age on a bench at 3 a.m. under a halogen light listening to moths thump their bodies against glass and wondering how it got this far. After breakfast at Bill's, I walked to the Robbins Financial branch on Tom Hill Senior Boulevard and asked to open my safe deposit box. Inside, I kept a copy of the Autumn Creek deed from that short sale, my name alone. I ran my thumb along the edge of the paper and felt something like oxygen return to my lungs. I also had a folder with receipts, taxes paid, insurance premiums, repairs for a busted water heater. Daniel swore he'd reimburse and didn't. I tucked it all into an old accordion file, the kind with the string tie, and wrote one word on the tab in black marker: proof. I'm not a clever man. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a father who worked until his knees gave out. But even I knew this love without respect curdles into entitlement, and entitlement turns kindness into a weapon. I had spent a lifetime paying in. It was time to withdraw with interest. The papers were filed, the footage handed over, and the judge had set a preliminary date. But paperwork was only half the battle. Truth is heavier than ink. It's in the memories that come back uninvited, in the way neighbors look at you when they think you can't see. I sat on Bill and Jean's porch one evening, watching the sky bruise purple over Macon. The cicadas screamed from the pines, and the air smelled of fried catfish drifting from someone's backyard. For a moment, I could almost pretend things were normal. But then my phone buzzed, and I saw the name Tyler. I hadn't spoken to my youngest boy in months. I let it ring twice before I answered. Dad, he said, his voice tight, what are you doing? What do you mean? You went to court. You're trying to make us look like criminals. I leaned back, staring at the cracked paint on Bill's railing. Tyler, you are criminals. You left your grandmother at a gas station in the middle of the night. That's not me talking. That's the law talking. That's the truth. You don't get it, he snapped. Daniel had a plan. You're messing it all up. What plan, I asked, though I already knew. Silence on the line, then a muttered curse. Click. He hung up. Fee. That night, I went into my room, pulled out the accordion file I'd built, and laid everything across the bed. Deed copies, tax receipts, bank statements, photographs of the old house with Grandma in the yard watering her azaleas. The Speedy Mart video paused at the exact frame where Dad's car rolled out of the lot headlights, cutting into the dark Grandma sitting small and still on that bench. For years, my father used silence as his weapon, a slammed door instead of an answer, a stare instead of a hug. And my mother. God bless her, helped him by saying nothing at all. Now my own children had learned that same silence. Block a number. Pretend I was invisible. But silence doesn't erase the truth, it only delays it. A few days later, I drove Grandma to First Baptist Church of Macon. It was Wednesday night supper, meatloaf, green beans, cornbread in aluminum pans. The fellowship hall smelled just like it had 30 years ago when Mary and I first brought the kids to potluck. I helped Grandma to a table, and folks greeted her like she'd risen from the dead. Ruth. We heard you were sick, one woman said. Another clasped her hand. We prayed for you, honey. Grandma just smiled, but I saw the truth in her eyes. These people thought she'd been cared for all along. They didn't know she'd been eating crackers for supper while her pills sat untouched in a plastic box. They didn't know she'd been left on a bench under buzzing lights, the night air cutting through her sweater. I knew, and now the court would too. The next morning I found myself parked outside the Willow Bend house. The lawn was neatly trimmed. Daniel had always been meticulous about appearances. Through the window I saw him at the table, head bent over paperwork. Marcy's van was in the driveway. I could almost hear their voices inside, Daniel insisting he had everything under control, Marcy trying to keep the peace, Karen nodding, lips pressed tight, and me always the problem, the burden, the disappointment. I remembered the day I carried a cast-iron bathtub up those porch steps by myself because Dad refused to ask a neighbor for help. My back ached at the memory. I remembered the Christmas I worked double shifts so Tyler could have his first guitar, only to have him pawn it a year later. I remembered signing over my last savings to save Daniel's house. All those years, all those sacrifices, and still at 75, I was curled up at a gas station bench at 3 a.m. That afternoon, Carol called. We've got the closing date on the house set for next week. The buyers from Macon are ready to move forward. I gripped the phone. Don't tell my kids, not yet. Of course, she said. Then softer, George, when the sale is final, you'll have security. You can choose where to live. You'll never depend on them again. Her words sank in. For the first time in years, I felt the ground shift in my favor. I wasn't the powerless old man they thought I was. I still had a say. That night, Grandma sat with me on the porch sipping tea. She turned to me, her eyes glassy but sharp. George, you carried all of us for so long. Maybe it's time you let the truth carry you. I nodded slowly. The truth, and this. I tapped the accordion folder on my lap. She smiled faintly. You always did believe in paperwork more than shouting. Paperwork leaves a trail, I said, and this trail leads straight to justice. I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling fan tick, thinking about the trial to come. My father always believed he owned everything, the house, the business, even our silence. He thought we were too scared, too dependent to ever push back. He thought 75 meant I was finished. But tomorrow, in a room full of neighbors and reporters, I'd show him something he'd never prepared for a father who finally stopped being quiet. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, not to my father, not to my mother, not even to myself. I whispered to Mary. They left your mama at a gas station, sweetheart. But I found her. And tomorrow I'm going to make sure they pay. The ceiling fan ticked on steady as a metronome. For once, I welcomed the sound. It meant the night was passing. Morning was on its way. The morning of the hearing drew closer, and with it came a kind of electricity under my skin. Not the nervous kind you get before surgery, but the steady hum I used to feel before a big job at the tire plant when you know you're about to lift something heavy and there's no one else to do it. I'd been living with Bill and Jean for 3 weeks now. They never made me feel like a burden. Jean left a plate for me on the stove every night after my shift. Bill and I would sit on the porch, 2 old men with aching joints sipping coffee so strong it could wake the dead. But every quiet moment made the silence from my kids cut a little deeper. Not one call, not one knock on the door. One evening, Bill leaned back in his chair and squinted at me. So what's next, George? You can't just stew here forever. I opened the accordion file spread across my lap. Property deeds, bank statements, that blurry gas station footage. Proof stacked high. I'm going to court. I'm going to do what I should have done years ago. Bill frowned. You sure they're your blood? I met his eyes. Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. They made their choice when they drove off. That night sleep finally came, but it was filled with dreams. I saw myself back in the tire plant grease under my fingernails, sparks flying as I welded. I saw Mary bringing me lunch in a brown paper bag, her hand brushing mine, her smile steady even though the chemo had thinned her hair. Then the dream shifted, and I was back on Willow Bend, standing in the yard with Daniel as a teenager. He'd just thrown his first strike in Little League, and I had lifted him high into the air, proud enough to burst. You'll go further than I ever did, son, I'd told him. But in the dream his face twisted and he said, You're just a burden, Dad. The bat in his hand turned into a set of car keys, and he walked away. I woke with a start, chest heavy, the fan ticking overhead. The next day I went with Carol to finalize the paperwork. She spread the documents across her polished oak desk. Here's the petition for guardianship. Judge Porter is tough but fair. With this footage and the doctor's report, I don't see how they can contest it. I nodded, my hands rough against the smooth paper. And the house. She tapped the deed. It's in your name alone. We'll set up a living trust, and you can decide what happens to it. If you want, we can have the sale ready to finalize right after the hearing. I thought of Daniel pacing in that kitchen thinking he held all the cards. I thought of Marcy twisting her ring, whispering apologies she didn't mean. And I thought of Tyler, the youngest, who still called me Dad, but didn't answer when it mattered. Yes, I said, sell it, quietly, don't tell them a word. Carol's eyes narrowed. She studied me for a moment, then gave a sharp nod. Understood. That evening, I drove my cruiser down Highway 41, lights off, letting the night wind cool my face through the cracked window. My thoughts kept circling back to that bench at the gas station. I saw Grandma's frail frame in the glow of the neon, and my chest clenched. But then I thought about her smile the night she signed the papers, the way she said, For once, I get to protect you. For decades, I'd thought I was alone, but maybe I wasn't. Maybe Mary's prayers had finally landed years late, but right on time in the shape of a judge, a lawyer, and a grandmother who refused to be silent anymore. The day before the hearing, I got a call at the precinct. It was from Pastor Whitmore at the church. George, he said, his voice low. I heard about what happened. I don't want to intrude, but if you need support tomorrow, folks here will stand with you. We don't leave our own behind. I sat there at my desk, hand frozen on the receiver. I thought about the years I'd sat in the back pew alone while Dad shook hands up front like a politician. People saw the surface, not the cracks. Now they were starting to see. Thank you, Pastor, I said. That means more than you know. That night I didn't dream. I cleaned my uniform instead, creased the trousers, sharp polished the brass buttons until they shone, buffed my boots until I could see my reflection. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because this time I wasn't walking into court as a broken man begging for recognition. I was walking in as a man who had carried his family, paid his dues, and been left behind. And I was going to let the law speak for me. As I laid the uniform across the chair, Grandma's voice drifted from her room. George, don't be afraid. Truth stands longer than pride. I sat there in the quiet, staring at the badge pinned to the fabric. She was right. Tomorrow the truth would stand taller than anything my children could scheme. It was in that silence that my decision finally settled in me, heavy but clear. I wasn't just showing up for myself. I was showing up for every old man or woman who'd ever been told they were useless, every parent shoved aside after years of sacrifice. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about drawing a line in public in front of everyone who thought my kids were saints. It was about saying no more, not me, not her. The gas station was the place they left me. The courtroom would be the place I left them. The morning light spilled across my small kitchen like warm honey, catching the steam rising from Grandma Ruth's mug. She sat at the table in her favorite blue cardigan, her silver hair tucked neatly under the brim of her police-style cap I'd given her as a joke. She wore it proudly anyway, chin lifted as if it were a crown. I watched her stir her oatmeal with the patience of someone who had lived through wars, depressions, and the quiet cruelty of her own family. At 88, her hands trembled, but her spirit was steel. Sometimes I wondered if she was the reason I had lasted this long in a world that had been so quick to discard me. "You're staring again, George," she said without looking up. "Your eggs are getting cold." I laughed. Old habits. I used to sit at this same table, watch Mary make biscuits and think, how'd I get so lucky? Now I sit here and think the same thing about you. She gave me that small smile she always saved for family, the one that crinkled the corners of her pale blue eyes. "Your mother wasn't always like this, you know. When she was little, she'd pick wildflowers just to see me smile. Somewhere along the way, she let bitterness take root." Her words cut, because I knew bitterness. I'd carried it like a rucksack for 15 years after she and Dad turned me out. I drove her to Dr. Haynes's clinic later that day. The nurse weighed her, listened to her chest, checked her blood pressure. Numbers were off, but better than the week before. Progress. "She's tougher than most folks half her age," Dr. Haynes said, scribbling notes. "But you were right to bring her in. Malnutrition like this doesn't happen overnight. She's been neglected for months." I clenched my fists, and they knew. They had to know. Dr. Haynes nodded slow. "I'll file my statement with the court. This won't go unnoticed." Grandma reached for my sleeve. "George," she said softly, "don't let this turn you cruel. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered, though in my chest something hard was forming. It didn't feel like cruelty. It felt like resolve. That night as she rested, I sat in the den with an old photo album. The leather cover cracked when I opened it. Inside were snapshots of birthdays, graduations, and Christmas mornings. There was Daniel at 16, grinning with his new baseball glove, his arm draped around my shoulder. There was Marcy in her prom dress, her smile wide, her eyes shining. There was Tyler, just a boy, grinning as he held his first guitar. I'd worked 2 jobs to pay for all that. The glove, the dress, the braces, the gas in the tank that got them to school and practice. I'd worked nights when my back was on fire, when my knees felt like gravel, when Mary begged me to slow down. And for what to be called useless, to be left in the cold, to be erased from their lives like I never mattered. I thought of my own father, Henry Miller, who came back from Korea with a limp and no pension. He worked at the mill until his lungs gave out from the cotton dust. When I was a boy, I swore I'd give him comfort in his old age, and I did. Mary and I brought him into our home on Willow Bend, set up a cot in the den, made sure he had his morning coffee and his radio tuned to the Braves games. He used to say, "Son, home ain't the walls, it's the hands that keep you warm." I never forgot that. Now, sitting in my friend's kitchen with the deed to the Willow Bend house tucked in my folder, I realized something. If I signed it over to my children, I'd be handing them a reward for their betrayal. If I stayed quiet, I'd be letting silence write the ending of my story. I'd already been silent once in my life when Dad threw me out at 18. I swallowed my pride then. I walked away, and it cost me decades of distance from my own mother. Not again. The next Sunday, Grandma asked me to drive her to church again. She wore the same blue dress, pressed crisp with her silver hair shining under the morning sun. I walked her down the aisle slowly, and I could feel the weight of eyes on us. Folks whispered, some nodded, some frowned, some looked away. After service, Mrs. Thompson, who'd lived 2 doors down from us on Willow Bend for as long as I could remember, took Grandma's hand. "Ruth, baby, why didn't you call me? I'd have come in a heartbeat." Grandma's eyes watered. "They took my phone, Helen. I tried, but they blocked me out." The gasp that went around that little circle was sharp. A man muttered, "Shameful." I stood behind Grandma, straight-backed in my uniform, and said nothing. I didn't have to. The truth was already spreading neighbor to neighbor, pew to pew. That night as I locked up the cruiser, Grandma called from the porch, "George, sit a minute." I joined her under the porch light, the air heavy with the smell of cut grass and summer dust. "I want you to do it," she said. "Do what?" "Sell the house. Every nail in that place was your father's pride and David's ambition. Neither ever saw what you gave. Let them see what it feels like when it's gone." Her voice didn't tremble. It was calm, almost stern. For a moment, she was the woman I remembered from childhood, the one who could hush my father with a single look. I nodded. "All right, Grandma, tomorrow we start." The decision was made. The line had been drawn. And for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of my father's control begin to lift. "There?" I went inside, closed the door, and sat at the table with the deed. My badge lay beside it, brass, catching the last of the porch light through the window. I whispered, Mary, I hope you're watching. Tomorrow I'm going to make this right. The night was quiet. No dreams this time, just steady breathing and the promise of justice waiting at sunrise. The courthouse papers were filed, the sale of the house was already in motion, and yet I knew something was missing. Justice wasn't just about signatures on legal forms. It was about truth spoken out loud where everyone could hear it. My kids had built their little empire on appearances, the perfect family, the successful business, the good Christian image. If I stayed quiet, they'd keep smiling for the neighbors, shaking hands at church, pretending nothing happened. And maybe that would have been enough for me years ago, back when all I wanted was to be left in peace. But not anymore. Not after that night at the gas station, not after watching Grandma Ruth flinch every time she heard a car door slam like she was back on that cold metal bench. So I made up my mind. I was going to peel back the curtain. If they could leave us out in the dark, I could drag their truth into the light. The first step came easy. I stopped by Speedy Mart on my lunch break and asked for the manager. Darnell, the young clerk who'd handed me coffee that night, was stocking shelves. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Mr. Miller," he said, "you all right now?" I nodded. "Better than that night, son. Much better. But I need your help. Do you still have that footage?" He grinned. I saved it. Couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it. Folks deserve to know what really happened. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "I figured you'd come back." I swallowed hard, taking the drive. "You've done more for me in 10 minutes than my own blood's done in 15 years. His cheeks flushed. "Just doing what's right, sir." From there, I drove to Dr. Haynes's office. He had already filed his statement with the court, but when I asked if he'd be willing to testify, he didn't hesitate. "These cases are hard," he said, adjusting his glasses. "But people need to see this. If they could do this to Ruth, what's to stop them doing it to someone else?" "Exactly," I said. "It's not just about us anymore." He shook my hand firmly, and I felt another piece of the puzzle lock into place. The hardest part was talking to the neighbors on Willow Bend Drive. I drove over one afternoon, parked down the block, and walked up to Mrs. Thompson's porch. She was rocking slow, a glass of sweet tea sweating in her hand. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said with a sad smile. "I heard some awful things, George. Tell me they ain't true." I sat down across from her, my hat in my lap. "Helen, you've known my mama for 60 years. You tell me, does she look like a woman who'd choose to sit outside a gas station at 3 in the morning? Her lips pressed thin. "No. Lord, no. I always thought Linda and the kids were treating her good." "They weren't," I said. "And now it's time folks knew. I don't want whispers. I want the truth out in the open." She nodded slowly. "Well, you just let me know what you need. Half this street raised your daddy's kids while he was working. We'll stand with you." By Friday, word had spread through town like wildfire. At the diner on Gray Highway, I heard men at the counter whispering. "You hear about the Whitakers left old Ruth at the Shell off 75. Whole night just sitting there." "No way." "Swear on it. Clerk's got the tape. The daughter and that son of his drove off, didn't even look back." I sat 2 stools down, eating my grits, and said nothing. Just let their words float in the air like smoke. "Grandma noticed the shift too. People look at me different now," she said one evening. "Not pitying me, respecting me." "Because you told the truth," I said. "Because you stood up." She gave me a sly little smile. "No, George. Because you did. You got that uniform on, you walk with your head high, and folks finally see what I always saw." Her words sank deep. For 75 years, I'd been the man who worked, who paid, who kept quiet. But maybe silence was never what made me strong. Maybe it was finally speaking. Then came the call from Channel 13 WMAs. "Mr. Miller," the reporter said, "we've obtained footage from the gas station. We plan to run a story. Would you like to comment?" I thought about it. The old me would have said no, would have wanted to hide the shame. But I wasn't hiding anymore. "I'll comment," I said, on the courthouse steps. That night before the final hearing, I sat with Grandma on the porch swing. The night was cooler now, a hint of fall in the air. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You know what you're doing will break them," she said quietly. "They already broke me, Grandma. This isn't revenge, it's justice. And justice doesn't whisper. It speaks loud enough that no one can pretend they didn't hear." She nodded, eyes glinting in the porch light. "Then let it speak, George. Let it speak." I looked down at my hands, at the scars and the veins. I thought of all the nights they'd wrapped steering wheels, wrenches, shovels, all the years they'd kept bread on the table. These hands had built a life brick by brick. Tomorrow they'd sign it away, and in doing so they'd write the final word on what family means. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of my children. They should have been afraid of me. The morning of the property hearing, I woke before the alarm. The sun was just beginning to push through the blind streaks of orange, slipping across my bedroom wall. I sat on the edge of the bed, ran my hand over the creases of my pressed uniform shirt, and felt the badge cold against my palm. For years I thought that house on Willow Bend Drive was my children's prize, their inheritance, their guarantee of wealth. But today I knew the truth. Today, the law would speak louder than any of us. I walked into the kitchen to find Grandma Ruth already awake. She was always up before me, no matter how early I tried. She was buttering toast, her hand trembling, but steady enough to spread the knife across the bread. "Morning, George," she said, smiling. "Court day." "Yeah," I answered. I poured coffee into my thermos, the steam fogging up my glasses. "You ready?" She took a bite of toast chewed swallowed. "I've been ready for years. It's your children who aren't." I sat down across from her, resting the accordion file between us. This is everything. Deeds, receipts, the footage from the gas station. It's airtight. She reached across, laid her hand on mine. "Then let's end this." The courthouse steps were crowded again, more reporters this time. I guided Grandma through the front doors, ignoring the flashes and the questions. My father and mother stood at the other end of the hallway. Daniel was beside them, his suit too new, the tags probably ripped off that morning. Marcy clutched her purse to her chest. Tyler lingered a step behind, his eyes darting anywhere but mine. When the bailiff called the case, we filed into the courtroom. The hum of whispered gossip died as Judge Porter entered. "Case of Ruth Whitaker versus David and Linda Whitaker," he announced. "We are here to finalize ownership of the property on Willow Bend Drive." Carol rose first, calm, steady. She spread the deed across the table so the judge could see. "Your Honor, as we've demonstrated, the deed to the property at 223 Willow Bend Drive is in the sole name of Ruth Whitaker, signed and notarized in 1976. Our client's late husband never amended it, nor did Ruth sign away her rights. Every tax bill since 2014 has been paid directly from George Miller's account. We have receipts." She slid the folder forward. The judge leafed through it, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Additionally," Carol continued, "given the defendant's documented history of neglect, we request the court's approval to transfer the property into a protective trust under Ruth's granddaughter, Officer Eleanor Whitaker, to ensure her continued care." The defense lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. My clients have lived in that house for over a decade. They improved it. They maintained it." "Maintained it?" I couldn't hold my tongue. I leaned forward. "I paid the taxes. I paid the insurance. I paid when the roof leaked. They didn't lift a finger except to spend." The judge gave me a look not unkind. "You'll have your chance to speak, Mr. Miller." I sat back, heart-hammering, fists clenched on my knees. Then came my turn. Carol called me to the stand. I swore, and my right hand raised, my left gripping the Bible they held out. "State your name for the record," the clerk said. "George Miller, 75 years old, born and raised here in Macon." Carol stepped closer. "Mr. Miller, can you tell the court about the circumstances of your ownership of the Willow Bend property?" I told them about buying that little brick house in 1976, about working nights and weekends, about Mary's casseroles and Daniel's first baseball glove. I told them about refinancing, about selling my boat to cover medical bills, about the day I bought Daniel's house to save it from foreclosure. "And when your children moved you in with them," Carol prompted. I swallowed. At first I thought it was kindness. I thought maybe after all the years of working I'd finally get to be cared for. But it wasn't about me. It was about what they thought they'd get when I was gone. The courtroom was quiet except for the scratch of the stenographer's keys. "Mr. Miller," Carol said, "can you explain to the court how you ended up at the gas station on September 5th? I nodded, though my throat was tight. Daniel told me we were going for a late-night drive. We stopped at the Speedy Mart off I-75. He asked me to step out, stretch my legs. I sat on the bench. He closed the trunk. And then he drove away. My daughter followed him. I sat there until morning. I called them over 100 times. They blocked my number. A murmur ran through the gallery. Judge Porter banged the gavel once, but his eyes stayed on me. "And who came for you, Mr. Miller?" "My friend Bill Jenkins. He picked me up at 4 in the morning. If it weren't for him, I don't know where I'd be." When the defense tried to object, Carol slid the flash drive onto the table. The clerk plugged it in. The grainy video filled the screen again. Daniel's SUV, the trunk popping, me stepping out slow with my bag, the headlights turning away, my silhouette shrinking into the night. The courtroom went silent except for the soft whir of the projector. I didn't look at my children. I looked at Grandma sitting in the front row, her eyes wide and shining. She mouthed one word: truth. Judge Porter leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "The evidence is clear. Mr. Miller is the rightful owner of the property. The sale to the new buyers is valid. The defendants will vacate the premises within 7 days." He paused, his gaze hard on my father. "And as for your conduct, abandoning a vulnerable adult in the dead of night, this court recommends charges be pursued. Pride does not place you above the law." The gavel cracked down, sharp and final. Daniel's face drained of color. Karen's mouth fell open. Marcy covered her face with her hands. Tyler stared at the floor, shame written in every line of his body. Me, I just stood. Slowly, stiffly, 75 years of weight on my knees, but not on my spirit. I straightened my uniform, rested my hand on my badge, and walked Grandma out of the courtroom. The whispers followed us, low and sharp like wind through pine needles. But this time, the whispers weren't about me. They were about them. As we reached the courthouse steps, the cameras flashed. Reporters shoved microphones forward. "Mr. Miller, how does it feel to take back the house?" I looked at Grandma. Her hand looped through my arm and then back at the cameras. "It feels," I said slowly, "like the truth finally came home." And for once, the silence that followed didn't feel heavy. It felt righteous. The day of the criminal trial came faster than I expected. By then, the house was already sold, the trust secure, and the money placed safely where my children couldn't touch it. But property was only one piece of the puzzle. What they had done at that gas station was more than betrayal, it was a crime. The courthouse was packed. Reporters, neighbors, church folks who'd once patted my kids on the back after Sunday service, all of them were there sitting shoulder to shoulder on the hard wooden benches. You could feel the tension in the air, a kind of buzzing that made the fluorescent lights hum louder. I walked Grandma Ruth into the courtroom, her cane tapping steady against the floor. She wore her church dress, the one with little white flowers embroidered at the collar. I could tell she was nervous, but her chin was high, her eyes clear. She had survived 88 years of life. She would survive this. Across the aisle, Daniel sat stiff in his suit, Karen whispering furiously in his ear. Marcy's lips trembled as she tried not to cry. Tyler kept glancing at me, shame flickering across his face before he looked away. My father and mother sat in silence, pale and tight-lipped, as if they could still intimidate me with nothing more than their presence. The bailiff called the case State of Georgia versus David and Linda Whitaker, charges of elder abandonment and neglect. The prosecutor, James Holloway, laid out the facts with the calm precision of a man sharpening a knife. On the night of September 5th, the defendants left Ruth Whitaker, 88 years old, at a gas station off I-75. Alone. Unattended, for over 6 hours. This was not an accident. It was a choice. He let the words hang heavy in the room. Then he nodded to the clerk and the screen lit up with the grainy footage once more. There I was on the bench, small in the glow of the fluorescent lights. Daniel's SUV pulled out taillights, shrinking into the dark. Marcy's van followed. And there I sat still as stone, the night swallowing me whole. Gasps spread through the courtroom. Someone whispered, "Lord have mercy." The judge banged his gavel once, order. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand in my uniform. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The wooden chair creaked under me, but my voice didn't. "Tell us what happened that night, Mr. Miller," the prosecutor said. I looked straight at the jury, 12 ordinary folks with faces lined by years of their own struggles. They told me we were going for a drive. We stopped at the Speedy Mart. Daniel said, "Stretch your legs, Dad." I stepped out. They closed the trunk. They drove away. I called them again and again, over 100 times, until my number was blocked. A murmur swept through the jury box. One older woman covered her mouth with her hand. "And how did that make you feel?" Holloway asked. I took a deep breath. Like I was trash they'd set out on the curb. Like 50 years of working my hands raw for them meant nothing. Like my life wasn't worth the price of a tank of gas. I let the words sit there, raw, unpolished. Truth doesn't need polish. Grandma testified next. She told the court how they'd taken her phone, how they'd rationed her food, how her pills sat untouched because no one cared enough to refill them. Her voice shook, but it carried, and when she said, "My own children abandoned me," even the court reporter paused, eyes wet. The defense tried to twist it. They said it was a misunderstanding, that they'd gone back for her later, that the footage was misleading. But the jury wasn't buying it. Not with the receipts, not with the doctor's statement, not with the truth laid out like raw lumber across the floor. Finally, Judge Porter delivered his verdict. His voice was steady, his gavel poised. This court finds David and Linda Whitaker guilty of elder abandonment and neglect. Sentencing will include fines, community service, and the permanent revocation of any guardianship rights. Furthermore, the court recognizes the courage of those who came forward. Let this be a warning: neglect of our elders will not be tolerated in this county. The gavel came down sharp as thunder. Daniel's shoulders slumped. Karen buried her face in her hands. Marcy sobbed quietly. Tyler sat frozen, staring at the floor as if it might swallow him whole. When I stepped outside, the cameras were waiting. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Miller, is this justice?" I looked into the nearest camera, the sun hot on my face, the courthouse stone bright behind me. "It's not about justice for me," I said. "It's about dignity for every parent, every grandparent who's ever been treated like a burden. Family isn't what you say in public, it's what you do in private, and what they did in private is now known in public." The crowd hushed, then slowly neighbors began to clap. Not loud, not rowdy, just steady, sure. Grandma squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening. "You did it, George," she whispered. "No," I said, my voice breaking for the first time in weeks. "We did." That night, as I sat on Bill's porch listening to the cicadas sing, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The truth wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd heard it spoken in that courtroom. And for the first time, I knew this: they hadn't taken my dignity. They'd only revealed theirs. The week after the trial, the house on Willow Bend stood empty. A sold sign leaned crooked in the yard, flapping in the autumn breeze. For the first time in years, I drove past without flinching. No weight pressed on my chest. No shame made me shrink in the driver's seat. It was just a house now, brick and wood. Whatever it had meant to my children was gone. I pulled into Bill's driveway, the smell of fresh-cut grass hanging in the air. Grandma Ruth was on the porch swing, wrapped in a quilt Jean had stitched, sipping her evening tea. She looked content, her cane resting at her side, her feet rocking slow against the floorboards. I joined her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just listened to the creak of the swing, to the cicadas tuning up in the trees, to the far-off hum of a train rattling toward Atlanta. Finally, she set her cup down and turned to me. "George, do you feel lighter now?" I thought about it. About the years of silence, the sacrifices no one thanked me for, the weight of disappointment. About the gas station bench, the buzzing lights, the bitter taste of burnt coffee in a styrofoam cup. And then about the gavel cracking down, the neighbors clapping, the way the truth had rung through that courtroom like a hymn. "Yes," I said simply, "I do." The Sunday after we went to church together, I wore my best jacket, Grandma her pressed blue dress. When we walked in, heads turned, not in pity, not in scandal, but in recognition. People shook my hand, hugged Ruth, whispered, "We're proud of you both." After service, Pastor Whitmore stopped me at the door. "Brother George," he said, "you showed this town something it needed to see. That dignity doesn't have an expiration date. That truth doesn't age." I swallowed hard, nodding. "Thank you, Pastor." Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with my journal. I don't write much, never have. But that night I put pen to paper and let the words come. "I was left at a gas station by my own children," I wrote. "They blocked my calls. They tried to erase me. But I am still here. I still have a voice, and I will never again let silence write my story." I closed the journal, slid it into the drawer, and felt a kind of peace settle in my chest. Now, as I speak these words, I know there are folks out there who felt the same sting, cast aside, silenced, made to believe their worth is gone. To you, I'll say this: you are not a burden. You are not disposable. Your dignity is yours to defend, no matter what anyone tells you. Family isn't blood alone. It's who stands with you in the dark. It's who answers the phone when you call at 3 a.m. It's who brings you coffee when the night feels too long. And sometimes when those you trusted most betray you, you have to draw your own line. You have to speak. You have to let the truth out, even if it shakes the ground beneath you. So if this story stirred something in you, don't keep it quiet. Share it. Talk about it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever felt invisible, remember you are seen. Thank you for walking this road with me.